Thank you so much and welcome. It is such a privilege to see so many of you here this afternoon with me, and I'm excited. I heard that you wanted the screens, so I ran to the back and turned them on and ran back here, and my heart's racing. So it's such a privilege to make music together, and it's such a privilege to have an instrument like this. I just wanted to say a brief word about this the Minimalistic Triptych here. The genesis of this recital actually goes all the way back to when this organ was installed. And as part of the celebrations of that event, they did a composition competition. And the winner of that competition was a French organ composer named Naji Hakim. And he composed a triptych for organ. And I actually played that triptych on my senior recital here when I was an organ major back in 2003. And I'm not going to play it today. I'll play it some other time, and you can come back then. But I loved the idea of triptych. And so that's what we're experiencing today. This is a common thing in liturgical art and music to have sets of three. This minimalistic triptych is by the Dutch composer Toon Hagen, and he is active in the Netherlands. He is the organist at the St. Michael's Kerk in Zwolle. And this is such a famous organ there because it was built by the Schnitger family. And for organists, Schnitger equals Stradivari for violinists. And that organ is beautiful. It's actually being fully restored right now, and I'm very interested to see what it sounds like after. But it is very similar in size and scope to this organ. And I love the way his music works so well on this type of organ. So I'm going to play two more of his pieces now. And just because of the nature of them, I would appreciate it if you don't mind holding your applause to the end so we can just experience these as a set. And again, thank you so much for being here today. So I'm very curious, is there anyone here? Is that working? There we go. I'm very curious, is there anyone here for whom this is the first organ recital you have ever been to? Okay, excellent. I see a few hands, even on the front row. But it says a lot about this instrument in this community, of course, that most of you, this isn't the case. But I was just curious to know, because those of you that have never been to an organ concert need to know that an organ concert must always include Bach. So we will have some Bach. Bach is that core of the history of the instrument where so many things coalesced, and the level and genius of what he was able to do. And in particular, these 6 trio sonatas, of which I will play one. I love these pieces for so many reasons, but one of the reasons is because they're so layered and so thoughtful. And organists love to sit around and talk about these pieces and try out these pieces. And I even see some people in the room here with which I have done that, just talking about these trio sonatas. I love to rock climb, and it reminds me a little bit of bouldering, which is my favorite version of rock climbing. And the reason I love it is because it's social, and you're all down there trying to figure out this problem, and then you go and you fall and you try again. And trios to me feel like that. For this particular trio, I wanted to showcase some of the unique colors of this instrument, and what you'll really be wanting to hear is 3 distinct voices, all in conversation the whole time. It's a bit like, trying to pat your head and rub your belly and skip at the same time. So it's a lot of fun for the brain, and it takes a lot of focus. I mentioned there are 6 of these trios. Organists, I've heard it said that you're not a real organist until you have learned all 6. And I've learned 4, so I'm almost there. Someday I will be a real organist. But I hope you enjoy this trio sonata by Bach. As we move into the next triptych, I've always been so fascinated with Impressionistic music, and there's just not a lot of it for the organ, as you can read in your program. This particular suite from Debussy has always been one of my favorites to play on piano, and especially after my daughters were born, I'd love to play this, whether they love it or not, just for their enjoyment. And it just has a lot of meaning to me personally, but it's also such interesting music that I think lends itself perfectly to the organ because there's so much color to choose from and so many options, especially on an organ like this. So in this next set, I am attempting to use just about everything I can throughout the organ just to kind of demonstrate some of the color and the beauty that you have here. And just wanted to mention the third movement, the Dr. Gratis. A lot of people ask, well, what is that? Who is that? What does it mean? And the honest answer is mostly we don't know. There are two piano composers, Czerny and Clementi, who wrote a lot of pieces called etudes, which were for learning purposes. They would teach you a specific skill. And they named several of them. Both of those composers apparently have pieces called Dr. Gratis. And so we're pretty sure that Debussy wrote his Dr. Gratis as sort of a parody and sort of poking fun at them in a mocking kind of a way. But it definitely demonstrates a certain keyboard skill set in order to pull it off. always leaves a smile on my face. Thank you, Debussy. You may have noticed as I'm playing that the sounds come from everywhere. And this style of organ, just a little bit about it, there are nearly 5,000 pipes. And you just see the very few in the front. Most of them are in the back, and it's designed kind of in sections. So there's 4 keyboards in the pedal board, 5 divisions. The pedal sounds come from the side towers, and you can hear that they do both low and high sounds. The top keyboard is this section of pipes right in front of me. And that's the hardest to use in the sense that it's right in my face, but it's the quietest to use, so I have to try and balance it. Just above that, this section here corresponds to the bottom keyboard, and then up at the ceiling is the second keyboard, and then up at the ceiling and behind that is the third keyboard. And all of these pipes are housed in little rooms, basically. It's sort of like an apartment complex here where they're all living. And what we do as organists is we just decide which combinations we like to use and which sounds we enjoy, and just combine them all together. So you've maybe heard the expression pulling out all the stops. And that's an organ expression because these black things are called stops, and the more I pull, the louder it gets. So lots of things come from the organ. This next American triptych is something that I'm really excited about. I made a pact with myself several years ago that I would never play a concert again that did not include at least one living composer and one minority composer. And this has especially opened up a whole new world of music to me that I'm so excited to have experienced. What we will have in this is sort of a cross-section of America. Fiesta, of course, has its Latin roots, but it was composed for the 4th of July, which I think is really important. And Emmylou Deemer was so much fun on Facebook. she was so active all the time and had all of the opinions. But she just died recently, and she is definitely missed. Hotso is, I'm just going to let you in on a secret. It's my favorite one on the whole recital, so please enjoy it. I discovered this piece at a conference for organists, which is where thousands of organists come together and just nerd out about organs. And this particular conference was in Seattle, where this piece was premiered. And I was so moved by it, I immediately hopped on and bought it. And then I had a concert 2 weeks later in Europe, and I played the piece there. So I just could not use it. And this is in part because I've always been really fascinated with Navajo culture. And Connor Chee is a Navajo composer that has traditional Western European training as a pianist and composer, but he is starting to experiment with organ music, which I'm so grateful for, so I think you'll enjoy that. And then Lay My Burden Down comes from a set of spirituals, and this is by British composer Ian Farrington. He came up through the English cathedral system and as a traditionally trained organist, but he has definitely made a name for himself in drawing from influences around the world and coalescing them into his music. And of course, spirituals have such a deep-rooted part of our culture, and something that's so much respected and appreciated across the globe. This one is a lot of fun to play. It's pretty bombastic and pretty rhythmic in all of the fun ways. And I like to think about music like this. When I was doing my dissertation, I was focused in on the craft of improvising, and I was focusing specifically on historically modeled improvising. But one of the things that I learned was that there's not much difference between the way the Baroque composers were improvising in practical ways and experimenting, and the way a lot of musicians, especially in American idioms, continued to do that. And Bach, for example, we know, spent a lot of time in Zimmermann's coffee house. Coffee had come and been introduced to Europe, and it was taking over the continent. And these coffee houses sprung up everywhere, and the composers would go there and they would interact with each other. Students, established, amateurs, they would come together and they would make music there together. And I just know that if Bach was still around today, he would be fascinated with all these complex American rhythms and harmony. And I can just see he and Ian Farrington having a conversation about all of this. I'd love to listen to that conversation. Just as an anecdote, Bach was regularly criticized by his congregations for making his music too complex and confusing and thus hard to sing. So organists experience the same things throughout all times and phases. But this American triptych is very varied and a lot of fun. I will thank you now for spending your afternoon with me and taking the time to experience this incredible instrument. And I'd like to especially invite you to continue to come to the different things that we have at the church this year. It's an exciting year with a lot of variety, and I hope to see full audiences like this for all of the things that we do. May I play just one more piece for you? Thank you. I'd like to play one other piece for you. This is also from Ian Farrington, and as it sends us on our way in a reflective manner, I think that's a nice time and way to end our time together. Thank you so much for being here today and for supporting such a wonderful ministry that we have in this community and amazing resources like this that we love to share.